Welcome back to Razmafzar TV. I'm going to greet now Bede. Hi, Bede. Welcome back to our channel.
Hello, it's good to be here.
Thank you very much. Today we are going to move on from Iran. We went to Ottoman Turkey. We talked about different cultures. But Razmafzar is not only about Oriental and Middle Eastern cultures and Asian cultures. We talked also about Chinese. We're going also to move into European and talk about European arms and armor. We are going to a very, very beautiful area. We are going to take your hands and go to Strasbourg, as we say in German, Strasbourg. Well, in French, pronounce it differently. It's part of France.
Back and forwards.
Yes, it's a part of France, of course. Strasbourg. That's just Strasbourg, as they call it in French, and in German, Strasbourg, as I mentioned. And they have a very beautiful museum. It's called Musée Historique. And this historical museum, or history museum, and they have different artifacts, and among them many type of arms and armor, most of them French arms and armor, most of them. We're going to show it, and let me just share them with you.
Mm-hmm.
So these are some of the artifacts we are going to see. It's the first page. Let us just move to the first one. Some swords, as you can see, and then let us start with these swords. There are 4 swords, as you can see them here, and the top one, they call it single-edged knife blade, 16th century. As we know, we use Messer, right?
Yeah.
We use Messer for that. They call it knife, okay. This was excavated and found at Erstein Kraftt, this one, which makes it extremely important, right? 16th century, right? Look at that one.
It's a very, very classic Messer design too. I assume it's single-edged. Is it double-edged towards the point, or is it too corroded to tell?
I think it's double-edged towards it was corroded as well, but should have been double-edged. Yeah, corroded as well, of course.
You can use it for thrusts, for cuts.
Yes, exactly. And then we have 3 swords with straight quillons, and from 12th to 13th century, they were found in Berstett and Kuttolsheim. These 3.
Yeah, they're much more damaged from corrosion. I'm assuming the one at the bottom, the point's just corroded away. It's not a cut or sword, because the central rib just carries straight on through the end, so that's not the end. That's either been broken off or it's just corroded away.
It's not an executioner's sword, exactly.
Yeah, that's what I'm trying to get at. Don't get carried away because it looks a bit like an executioner's sword. This is sometimes what happens when swords have been buried in the mud or left in a room that's got damp coming through the stones or whatever. It can dramatically change them. But things like center ribs or fullers are a really good indication if the blade was longer, and that clearly looks like it's like that. The one at just below the Messer, I mean, most of the point has corroded away.
Yes.
But see, that's thinner. That's the thinner part of the blade, so the metal is more easily corroded. The one in the middle, I at first thought it had a center rib, but is it possibly a diamond section blade, like a very flattened diamond?
This one, you mean, right?
Yeah.
Here, especially in this area, yeah. would be.
That's what I mean. It could be a rib. It could be a center rib, but flattened diamond section blades were not uncommon.
Yeah.
But
Very
these
nice.
are single-handed swords with a bigger hilt than they would have had in the, say, Carolingian period. The hilt is longer. You've got more ways you can hold it. But a very nice
Very
group
nice.
of swords.
Here we
And the
have
arm
a
very
yes.
nice too.
Yes. We have a better now.
Oh yeah, so you can see the rivet holes in the tang of the Messer.
Yeah. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Yeah, yeah. And the nagel, the little guard that comes out.
Yes. Exactly.
That's a wonderful example.
Wonderful. Yeah, really.
Yeah, and then these I think the bottom one has a wheel pommel, and the other two, they call them Brazil nut pommels, that
Yes.
shape. I'm not.
Yes.
My knowledge of European weapons is limited to the things I come across when I'm looking for something else. Doesn't
The
mean I don't
pommels are
like it.
beautiful, huh?
Yeah. See, these are, and from what I've read and what I've heard people saying, these swords were actually very well balanced in the hand,
Yes.
and that allowed you to strike fast and with authority, with strength.
Look at them, please. The one below, you can see the pommel here now better.
Yeah. I'm just looking at also how solid those tangs are.
Very solid.
The one with the wheel pommel, the tang looks to be really quite thick, almost twice as broad as it is thick, which is very, very strong.
Very. And
The
you know, we
others,
need to take this into consideration. These things are excavated, huh? This
I
makes them
know
very interesting.
that's why I'm so impressed, because I mean, usually from what I've heard, the tangs have less carbon in them than the blade, because they don't want them to be brittle, and maybe they don't rust as fast. And of course, when they were buried, they may have had their handles, and that may have protected the tangs for
Yeah.
a while. They may have been in scabbards. I mean, that's not unknown either. They're really nice examples, and they know where they were found, which is brilliant. See, the value of museums. Oh, daggers.
Mid
So we've got,
16th century.
yeah, my nomenclature is based mainly on watching Todd's workshop making these and selling them. So that the second from the top, that developed eventually into the Holstein dagger shape, but it's earlier and it's much longer and very robust. The one at the very top looks to have a very thin square section blade.
Yeah, it is square section. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's probably for squeezing into gaps in armor.
Yeah.
The one at the bottom also has a really solid blade,
Very.
whereas the two with the Holsteiny kind of hilts have flatter, more knife-like blades.
Yes.
Double-edged, but not quite so anti-armor looking. I mean, all of those, when they were new, would have killed you equally well.
Of course.
Just the one at the top and the bottom seem to be more specifically for fighting against people in armor, whereas the ones in the middle seem to be more general purpose.
Yeah.
You could probably force them through mail because the tips were probably reinforced, but the long, broader blades would enable cutting and all kinds of things that are practical when you get into a fight with somebody.
Yes.
Yeah, really. I mean, it's good to see early examples of things like this. Oh,
yes.
And two-handed swords.
Yes, two-handed swords. One of them, I mean, the one on top, this one, which is Deltine made an example of that. The Italian sword maker, I think, is late 15th to early 16th century. And then Biedenhänder, as we say it in German, two-handed sword. And then the other one is Flamberge, wavy hand, as we can see them here. And this one is also 16th century. So please take a look at these things. Beautiful, huh?
Yeah, the bottom one, aside from the wavy blade, which is a specific thing, but it has more. The fittings are more the size of 16th century fittings,
Yes.
and though they both, that ricasso part is shorter than in later swords, so
Yes.
these are early in the development of these big swords, I would guess, from looking at them. The cross guard on the lower one is quite decorative, but all of those little curls would trap a blade if somebody tried to get you with another blade. The one
Yes.
on the top has a strong midrib, possibly formed by a couple of fullers either side of a part of it. That looks to be a much more workmanlike sword, more designed for serious combat. But that might be a prejudice of mine, because my experience with Blamberge blades are limited mainly to Indonesian and Filipino weapons.
Pete,
But
do you remember in Arms and Armor from Iran? When I was in Museum of Iran, there was one beautiful Shamshi of Shah Safi with his attribution, with documentation made of crucible steel. When I took it out, all of them are extremely sharp. With that one, you could lift your nail and you could shave with it.
yeah,
With with wavy blades,
yeah. See, well,
completely
the
balanced.
razor blades were made for special swords in Iran and in Turkey. I've seen one or two in from the imperial collections from China as well. So they clearly had a attraction, I would guess, to rich people, because they're very hard to make
Yes,
well.
very.
I mean, because they didn't just grind out those things, they hammered out those and then they polished them in. So that's a lot of work. I mean, how can I put it? I really regard the blacksmiths that made these kind of things very highly, because getting a piece of hot steel and beating it out into a sword blade uh, requires strength, skill, and vision. You've got to be able to see in your head what you want to have come out at the end. It's not like getting a grinder and grinding a block of steel down into a blade. It's not the same thing, and the blades aren't as good either if you do that. But this kind of stuff, imagine forging a blade that long, because you can only heat
It's,
part of it at a time, and you hammer it out, and then you heat the next part and hammer it out, and then heat the next. I mean, oh, gee, this is so much work.
it
I'm
is.
sure people were really good at it, and they could do it in much less time than somebody today could. But
Yeah,
still doesn't take away from how much skill is involved in making swords like this.
yes. So we can see and take a look more at the handles here, right?
Yeah, see, the top one with the plain blade has just a simple crossguard, and the ricasso is protected by two projections. Whereas the bottom one, I think it's got rings on the side of the crossguard. It's
Yeah,
got loops. It's got almost a fleur de lis at each end of the quillons. It's a real tour de force. Notice how narrow the handles are. I don't know whether the actual handles are later,
mhm,
restorations. I only ever handled one of this type of sword, and it was a late 16th century, maybe right at the end of the 16th century.
mhm.
And the grip was really comfortable, but it looked bigger than that. They done a wooden grip, and then at various points they tied Turk's heads in leather, and then they covered the whole thing with leather, wet leather and glue, and pushed it in so that those patterns came up through the leather.
Mhm.
And honestly, it was so well balanced. Even I, who am not a strong guy, could hold it out like that. Now, I couldn't do anything with it without using two hands, but you could hold it out like that and just move your, like, you can't see it, but just move your wrist, and the whole sword would move perfectly, because it wasn't, I don't know, I think we did weigh it, but it wasn't super heavy when you considered how big it was.
Yeah.
Was clearly designed to do a lot of damage, uh, whatever the context. But see, here we've got very plain, highly decorated, but both of them designed for function, not just looks. I mean, these aren't just to carry in front of the king or something. These are to fight with. I'm sure they did make some just to carry in front of the king, but oh, look at these nice armors.
Yes, it's a beautiful armor.
I love the fact that the shape of the sabatons, the foot part of the armor, used to always follow whatever the most fashionable shoe was at the time. Because there's no point in spending all this money on armor if you don't have fashionable feet.
Yeah, shoes are important, right?
Yeah. Excuse me, I'll just have a drink of
No
water.
problem. Look how well protective this armor is. Huh? Unbelievable.
Yeah, it's well, the sides of the breastplate where the arms are well protected by the shoulder armor. I'm not going to go through the European terminology for this because my knowledge of it isn't precise enough to not make mistakes that will make people laugh out loud. I know what the bits are, but at a given period, I don't know what they would call, or in a given country. But the breastplate is, I think, what they call a peace cod because it comes out towards and then tucks back in at the underneath the belly kind of thing. This gave a shape that was really good for deflecting weapons.
Yeah.
And just having that shape made it stronger than a flat piece of metal because it spread the forces differently. The gorget up around the neck there, again, really looks very well designed. It's got flexibility. It's got little articulated plates. I'm assuming that the arm armor, including the shoulder parts, are for a foot armor because they are normally certainly in Italian armors, they're normally different sizes if you're going to use a lance, because the one on the side that you're holding the lance is smaller than the one on the other side. Whereas this is even, which means I think it's meant for foot fighting. And I notice he's holding a halberd and there's another kind of poleaxe-y kind of thing behind him.
Yes.
And this is classic fighting on foot weapons. But it's well designed. The flaring skirts of the armor are really designed to intercept and either deflect or by their movement absorb energy from blows coming. Because blows coming down that go towards the top of your thighs and that, if they get through and cut tendons or something, you're crippled. Yes, even if they don't kill you. And if your armor doesn't absorb enough of the force, you can develop, like over the next 10 minutes, start to develop big bruises where your big thigh muscles attach. And that makes walking really painful. Any kind of bruising does. But these are clearly designed well. The big gap in the front of the skirts of the armor possibly there may have been a codpiece that went with this armor. Possibly it's to make mounting a horse easier or sitting on a saddle easier.
Yeah, this part.
Yeah.
This part.
Yeah. My guess is that this armor came with a set of extra pieces, and there was a different skirt for fighting on foot in tournaments, more like a full skirt going all the way around.
Yeah.
But when I said that the upper part of the armor, it looks like it's set up for fighting on foot, that doesn't mean that you couldn't use this lower part. The other thing I think modern people don't notice, people who owned this armor were upper class, quite wealthy people, because it costs a lot of money. Wealthy people didn't walk anywhere; they rode, and as a result, they have very thin legs. And if you look at the leg armor, that's got to fit a guy's leg and his clothes and everything inside it. It's very thin. It was a classic. One of my friends who used to deal with antique arms said when you got officers' boots, cavalry officers' boots from the First World War, the the calves were only that round. No modern person could get their leg into them because our legs are too big because we do a lot more walking. So that's, it's one of those, when you see really big legs on armor, armor's made for a particular person. These aren't munitions armors. These are made to fit a particular person. But when you get big leg armor, it usually means it's for somebody who had unusually big legs at the time. Henry VIII's later armors, when he was an older man, are a good example. Aha.
Okay, this is what we have. This is an articulated hand and arm of the Knight of Mittelhausen from mid-16th century. This is the original one. Then we have a reconstruction of the Balbronn articulated hand and arm. This reconstruction here was made between 1908 and 1918, made by the brothers A and O Zschokk, fine ironworkers at the Ecole des Arts Décoratifs in Strasbourg. That's what they made.
So isn't that, you kind of think when you see the articulated gloves and everything of the armors, what would happen if they decided to make a automaton's arm or something like that? And then you think, oh, wait a minute. Here's an example. It's made for a person who loses their arm in battle, and he's rich enough and knows the right people to find somebody who is skilled enough to make the hands. I mean, this is around the period of, Leonardo da Vinci and Michelangelo and that. There were a lot of really skilled people around, and you get them together with some really skilled armorers, and then you're producing a prosthetic arm.
It's unbelievable. It is really unbelievable.
And there's all kinds of mechanism inside it too. So maybe he could activate it with his stump or something like that by, tensing his muscles. They might have I don't know. And maybe they just were spring loaded and he pressed a button on his wrist and the hand closed. Who knows? Well, probably somebody does. The guys that made the reproduction probably
yes, they do.
But it's just an amazing piece of workmanship.
Amazing. It's really amazing.
And practical. I mean, this, because people lost arms and legs. So they didn't lose them. Somebody cut them off.
Yes, they did. I was just thinking about it.
Yeah, it's strange phrasing in English. But the thing that's important is that you might have got your arm cut off in battle, but a lot of people got arms and legs cut off because of gangrene from wounds that have gone bad, because no antibiotics, folks. And so there are a lot of people that ended up losing limbs, and battlefield surgery and general surgery, I mean, they didn't have antibiotics, they didn't have antiseptics or anything, but they had a relatively high success rate.
Yeah.
I mean, relative to what you think could go wrong, and a lot of things can go wrong. I mean, a person could die from shock. Admittedly, a lot of these soldiers must have been very insensitive in terms of they could stand a lot of pain. But it's just amazing how many people ended up with missing limbs. And here's somebody who ended up with a prosthesis that had moving fingers. As I say, whether they moved because you pressed a button on the side, or it doesn't really matter. If you just need your hand to hold something and you use your arm to move it, so you turn it around and you can.
When I look at it, I was just thinking, there was a fight, and then this knight goes and gets his arm chopped off. Then some months later, his enemy says, okay, got rid of him. Then he comes back with this again. And he's holding his sword.
If you just put an armored sleeve over it, nobody'd know until he couldn't move something. It'd still block a sword. It's just incredible.
The guy is back again.
Well, it's like the Monty Python thing,
Exactly. I really, when I was in this museum looking at it the whole time, I was laughing. And my son said, I was there with him, because my wife and my daughter were shopping, and my son said, why are you laughing? And he was laughing as well. I said, yeah, you're right, Dad. He comes back again. Oh, God, he's back again. Yeah.
History is weirder than you think.
Look at this now, a close-up.
Oh, yeah. Look at the mechanism in the hand
Yeah.
and the detail in the fingers. And when you see the,
Unbelievable.
uh, I mean, they've even
Unbelievable.
modeled the fingernails and everything. It's just great.
Great, huh? Really great. Amazing.
Yeah,
When I see these things, we say we always underestimate what our ancestors could do and could make.
you got to remember around this time they're making clocks, mechanical clocks of great complexity and things like that. So in reality, it's they didn't have the power we had. They had water wheels and stuff. And there were trip hammers operated by water wheels. So they almost had automatic hammers for blacksmiths and that. But considering the restrictions they had, they were very inventive people. And they were kind of, as we do, making the best of what they've got.
Yes, that's right. And now we go here.
Oh, yeah.
Horse armor, Maximilian period, late 15th century, and also 1520. This is a beautiful horse armor. I really love it.
Yeah,
to
me, it's got the design look of something that a car designer and somebody like that, they all got together to come up with this design to fit over a horse. It's flared out at the back, so its back legs don't get restricted when it's galloping. Not that they gallop very much in full armor. It's got the big gap. I mean, there's a breastplate sitting there, but a big gap where his legs come down. So the armor on the horseman's legs partially protects that area. If they had too much armor there, they wouldn't be able to use their spurs, and spurs are important in the style of riding that they were using. The saddle has steel plates front and back to protect the delicate parts of the knife. It has knee pads as well, which is interesting. It is a known thing in European saddlery, but it's not that common. You notice that the chamfron, the side plates of it are really quite big. They protect right back past the horse's jaw. The part that goes over the horse's spine on its neck is much shorter than you would imagine, because more than half the horse's neck is exposed. But maybe they were really only thinking about people coming head on. And the back of the horse's neck is in danger from someone striking with a sword, either that way or that way. And so it's an area that you'd really want to protect.
I just wanted to compare this to an Ottoman Turkish horse armor. When I look at it, it reminds me like a full European plate armor, a human, to Joe Shan type, and now we see the same on a horse.
Yeah. Well, this is it. I mean, the thing about the Ottoman armor, it has more protection for the horse's neck. And again, you've got to remember that the mannequin for this on the Ottoman armor, his legs are too straight. His feet wouldn't be hanging at the edge of the armor; they'd be higher up. Whereas on the European armor, that much of the guy's leg and foot would be below that lowest part of the armor, because they're sitting much straighter in the saddle. And the saddle on the Ottoman one isn't even vaguely like an original one. Whereas the saddle on the European one looks like it's an original of the same time, and possibly the plates in that are same style as the armor itself. But you can see a lot of thought has gone into that European armor. The kind of manufacturing process of using bigger plates, I think in the long term, you use more skilled labor, but for a shorter period of time. Whereas in the Joseon style, the labor is not as skilled for most of the production. I mean, making small plates doesn't require a master blacksmith, but putting it all together properly requires a master armorer.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I have a feeling
Mhm.
that the Turkish armor was cooler for the horse because more air could circulate through it,
Yes.
whereas the European armor, I think, might have been quite hot for the horse. And horses overheat worse than humans do because they sweat differently.
Yes.
So
Yes.
it's really important to keep a horse's temperature in a reasonable place. But the other chamfron in the European armor facing on the right hand side of the image facing outwards, look at the beautiful fluting in that, which Maximilian style armor was always done with, well, was done with a lot of the time, so that it became the kind of way you identified it.
I
But
will
that
come
fluting,
back to that, to this
oh yeah,
chamfron. But please take a look at the body armor. Just put these two also next to each other.
yeah. Again, we're looking at the same distinction. Big plates in the European armor with smaller articulations, small plates in the Turkish armor, but it's much more bendable.
Yes.
Now, the advantage of the European armor is it absorbs a lot of shock and distributes it. The advantage of the Turkish armor is it gives you more flexibility in your movements. So hopefully you can dodge that blow. Uh, and you can see better. I mean, I mean, the Moran that armor is wearing is probably the best visual because it comes up like that. It gives you a lot of protection from sword blades coming in, but you get really good vision.
Yeah.
Which I think is terribly important.
Yes. Okay. Now, excuse me. And then this is the chamfron you talked about, the fluted. And this is the Ottoman Turkish one in St. Petersburg and in Strasbourg. So we can take a look.
It's interesting that if I'm reading this right, it's hard to say. The European chamfron, whether it's the eye protection alone is divided in two, or whether the whole thing is divided in two between the eyes, horizontal line, I don't know. And then that kind of shield-shaped plate covers it. It's got a plume holder behind it.
I just wanted to say that. Exactly.
Yeah. And the kind of ear protection are facing back.
Yeah.
So that the horse's ears, if they face forward, they're just pointing into the steel. If they face back, they can hear better. But that's obviously to stop your horse's ears getting cut off. The Ottoman one, that's a fairly plain chamfron for an Ottoman chamfron. Some of them are fluted as well, or have other features on them, or are inlaid with gold and jewels and whatnot. But it's quite they're basically doing the same thing. The Ottoman, you notice the European one flares in towards the horse's nose and then flares out again, whereas the Ottoman one's more uniform in its taper. I think these are more design choices than practical things. The Ottoman one also looks as though there's got holes right down the front of the chamfron along the edges. I think they're holes, in which case it probably had a backing that was riveted to it.
Bede, look at this. Is it a screw head? Look at this.
It's possibly a screw head because maybe that comes off and you can take the armor apart for cleaning.
Yeah.
They definitely use screws. I mean, Europeans were famous for developing lots of different types of screws. And I mean, when you think about it, that plate, it covers the plume holder. Maybe there's different plates for different purposes. Maybe there's one that screws on that has one of those spikes like some of the other armors do. Yeah, it's definitely looks like a screw to me. Whereas the other things you see are definitely dome-headed rivets, which are quite a normal thing to use. But it's a very stylish, I think is the word you'd use for it.
Yeah, exactly. Very stylish. Very stylish.
The other shape, the horse
look at this. What is this?
In the back.
Yeah, is it a ventilator?
Well, I mean, it makes you think, doesn't it? Yeah. Put a little fan in there.
I just looked at it when I was, is it a ventilator because the horse gets too hot for it? What is it?
Yeah. I think it's purely decorative, but
yeah, it is.
Not think of it as being a ventilator. I honestly, they're having things like semi-dome things on horse armor, and that is not unusual in quite a few cultures.
Yeah.
Because being made like a cage makes it lighter. But it's very unlikely somebody's going to be spearing a horse from either quarter from the rear. If you're behind somebody, you're going to spear the guy, not the horse.
It's interesting. You can see it's made of different plates and then attached to each other.
Yeah. And I'm assuming that it's just riveted. You can see various holes with nothing in them, and I assume that that's where internal straps were.
Yes.
That have not survived, because they're in a good place for internal straps.
Yes.
And it kind of looks out. Yeah, there are further ones. Your cursor drew me down to the bottom rim of the armor, and there are also paired holes there for straps or something.
Yeah. Here.
But that, like, the bottom of the armor appears to be an applied plate that they've hammered out ribs in.
Yes.
Now, that might mean it's not as thick as the upper part of the armor, because they're trying to make the armor lighter.
Yes.
And the ribs maybe to strengthen it. I mean, obviously they're decorative, but there may be practical reasons they did that as well.
Yes.
You know, good artists, it's pretty hard to tell whether they did it because they liked it or they did it because they had a practical purpose, because the whole thing is to make it look as though it's just one design. I'm looking at the cantle of the saddle. It's also fluted.
Yeah, here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of, similar techniques being used in this armor, which makes me think that other loose chamfron may be associated with the same workshop because of the similar techniques being used. But they were probably used all over places like Augsburg and things like that, because, it's just practical.
Pete, look at this. Are they hinges?
Yeah, they're definitely hinges.
Yeah.
I'm wondering, are they, because that takes straps, it's strapped on under the horse's jawbone, and that, is that to make it fit better? I think it might be.
Yeah.
Because they're not in a good place to fold out. They can't fold out because the eyebrow ridge comes down and stops them from lifting up. So this is to go in underneath the horse's jaw.
Can I look at this spike? I call it the dangerous unicorn.
Oh, yeah. The thing about the spike may be purely referencing unicorns, because when you think about it, horses don't butt. So the horse is never going to use that. If a horse wants to hurt you, he's going to kick you, because they're very good at that.
Yes.
Rarely they bite you. They're quite good at biting. One of my friends can attest to that. I think the spike, I think it's mainly decorative. Maybe it stopped things sliding over the chamfron into the rider's leg. I don't think so. I think it's mainly decorative. If somebody, if the horse threw its head up like that, which horses do, and somebody was stupidly standing in front of it, then they could get damaged. But I think it's more dangerous to the people around him than it is to the enemy. But it would be scary if it was coming towards you. There's no two things about it.
Yes. This is this fluted chamfron, and then 1520 to 1530. Yeah.
See, I mean, this is quite late in terms of horse armor. You don't see a lot of it, because by the time that in the 1530s, there are a lot of handguns around. I mean, they weren't sophisticated like even 100 years later, but they would shoot through horse armor quite well. Yes. And a horse is a big target. You only have to hit part of it and you've caused real trouble.
Yes, absolutely.
But horse armor, on the other hand, it stops those random cuts getting in. And a simple one-handed thrust wouldn't be strong enough even with a spear. If you've got a couch lance or you're using both hands, you might be able to do damage, but it's pretty effective.
This was a jousting knight on a tile, from 14th to 15th century. So you see that? Beautiful.
Yeah, he's leaning back in his cantle. He's got his feet forward, which are to brace him against the cantle. So they're not leaning forward, they're leaning back. I'm not sure that's... I've met a few jousters, never got to talk to them about things like this, because people that are doing jousting nowadays run into the same problems as people back then did, with the exception that the people that they're fighting against aren't really trying to kill them, as these guys would sometimes.
Yes.
I mean, there are often... There's one of the kings of Portugal wrote a treatise on horseback riding, and he does mention melee combats in tournaments, and he points out that it's supposed to be one-on-one, but sometimes people who have a grudge against somebody else, all their friends get together and beat him and stab him and whatever. And, you know, it's clearly not the intention of the sport, but it does happen. Oh, isn't that nicely done?
So this is a Mauryan 17th century. They call it flamboyant arc motif from 17th century. I really love Mauryan helmets.
Yeah, and they've got so much vision. I've heard from people, I haven't worn one, but I've heard from people that have worn them that even your hearing's not too bad. But they've also, because of their shape, they catch blades.
Yes.
You've got a big comb over the top of your head, so anybody that's whacking you really hard on the top of the head, their blade's going to be stopped by that comb.
Yeah.
So
yeah, that's the comb, yeah.
And you can rock them back on your head to get cool and then put them back on. They're a pretty, you know, functional type of helmet.
Yes.
Oh,
jousting armor, a breastplate for it. So
yeah.
these three, Bede, explain this for lance.
The three holes there were to bolt on a lance rest, yes. Which enabled you to couch your lance much more strongly than if you just had it stuck under your arm. And the lance rest can be taken off, because if you go to fight on foot, you don't want this thing sticking out like that. So you just have it taken off. Your squire puts it in a saddlebag or something. Notice also at the top of the breastplate on the sides where the arms are, they've got two little sliding plates, so you can bring your arms across. Yeah. But when you're relaxed, the breastplate covers more of your chest. Very simple thing, but I think very useful.
Why does this armor give me the impression that the guy had a big belly?
Well, they designed it that way because it's designed to deflect things.
Yes.
These came in, I think, after handguns became popular. And I think the idea was that if you got shot at, the bullet is not going to hit any plate flat on. It's going to hit it at an angle and bounce off. Yeah. And more to the point, people's doublets and upper garments were made in that shape for a period as fashion. So, I mean, this might have been a working design for an armor, but the people ordering armor probably thought more in terms of, I want something that looks like my jacket that I wear around town. So there's actual padded jackets that they used to wear that have that shape. So it was a fashion. I think it was a fashion thing before it was an armor thing. I'm sure that there'll be people out there that can correct me on that. As I say, I'm not anywhere near well informed about European armor. So that's a bergonnette, I think, isn't it?
Yes, it is. Bergonnette, second half.
I should read the things when they're there instead of guessing.
No problem. Second half of the 16th, yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, so the cheek plates fold right back out of when you put it on, and then you fold them around and you do the straps up and that. It's got a kind of visor, but the visor is turned up like that to give you better vision, but it still would catch downcoming sword blades.
Yes.
So I once had the opportunity to handle a triple crown bergonnette, which is this style, but it has 3 ribs on the crown. And it was remarkably comfortable to put on. This was an original one that somebody let me play around with for a while.
Pete, look at this. These are hinges, right?
Yeah, yeah. So the cheek plates hinge out and back. It's not meant to be worn with them like that, but it just means when you put it on, you can strap them up and get a really good protection for your lower face as well as the sides. They're they're very stylish looking helmet, but they have a lot of practical features to them. I suppose on a hot day you could just open it up and let the air flow in.
You know,
See,
I don't know if I'm.
earlier helmets, European helmets, if it got too hot, you had to take it off, and once you took it off, somebody shot you in the face.
You know, it's
Uh,
so interesting that I don't know if why not, right? Even in the Second World War, the German army they called their helmet like Sturmhaube. That's why when I looked at it, I said, "Eh, it's a German name for it, right?"
yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
that makes sense. You notice, sorry, you notice also at the back of the crown that
Yeah.
there's another little tube to put feathers and plumes and horsehair things in it and stuff like that.
Mm.
So we might have this very practical helmet, but I mean, it is very stylish looking, but we're going to have feathers and everything as well. Yeah, the rivets, I'm guessing the rivets across the top were either they if the visor is a separate piece, it folds in and goes inside and then it's riveted on, or they were for holding some kind of lining, because there are rivets all around the edges as well,
Yes.
which
Yes.
makes me think I mean, the one I saw had definite traces of lining or the whole lining.
These
But
are
many,
rivets, and here there are screws, right? These four.
yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, again, I think these helmets could be taken apart for cleaning and refurbishing,
Yes.
because they were meant to last a long time.
Yes.